remember at the very beginning there was actually a report about the cricket bat possibly having been used to beat Reeva, and there was quite a lot of misreporting going on, and I actually only came on at the very beginning of the trial. So in those few months beforehand, I was just watching it on television, and I remember my first instinct was when I saw Oscar Pistorius in court at that bail application, and he'd been shot in such a way that he almost had this halo around him, and he looked like this very hunted figure, and I felt quite sorry for him. I don't like to see somebody who's been hunted down and who's been sort of chased and standing there looking confused and humiliated. I think there was a sense of disbelief in the very beginning. And I think that court reporting for a long time has trained me to be quite reserved, and I wouldn't say dispassionate, because I think then that's got problems of its own, but is to be quite analytical and to sit back and look at it in quite an objective point of view, because you do this all the time. And it's only when I got here that I realized there was this sense of this thumping of anxiety that was going along the outside court, that this was a massive story.
It was so massive, in fact, that we decided to run this coverage live, every detail of court, and it served a couple of purposes. It was instructive to the general public who perhaps had never set foot inside a courtroom. It allowed them to see how the wheels of justice turned. It also allowed them to come really up close and personal with the evidence in this case. And right at the very beginning, there were some stunning admissions about the mishandling of evidence and the protection of the evidentiary chain, Karyn.
This is one of the great tragedies of this entire narrative, is that, as Judge Masipa reflected today, people simply do not accept the court's findings about what exactly transpired in the early hours of Valentine's Day 2013. And one of the great sadnesses for me is that there was such fundamental mishandling of that crime scene that whether there was evidence exonerating Oscar Pistorius or proving beyond reasonable doubt that he was indeed guilty of murder with direct intent, we will never know, because all of that stuff was lost. And I remember Karyn trying to, during his cross-examination of Oscar Pistorius and subsequently in his summation of arguments saying, pointing to what he described as the 6 big lies that Oscar Pistorius had told, but they were all premised on the crime scene. And ultimately the judge was, well, we can't really do anything with this, whether jeans were hanging over fans or there was, the plugs were not plugged in or whatever. We don't really know, because we have multiple sets of crime scene photos which shows things that were moved around. And in an environment where you're looking at beyond reasonable doubt, you can't allow that kind of doubt into your narrative.
You take a public figure like Oscar Pistorius, who was in effect put on some sort of pedestal. He was the triumphant Oscar, a man who smashed records and evolved world expectations around the abilities of somebody who was physically compromised as he was. And then you learn about all of these other things, the revelations in court, the shooting range revelations, the SMS exchanges, all of the nuances about who Oscar was. I mean, that was also very starkly revealed in court.
And you sit there and you think, dear God, thank you for making this not about me, because every single conversation that you've probably had in the past, every ex-boyfriend, girlfriend, everything you've done, all your family secrets, they all become public fodder. And there's not that much you can do to really defend yourself from that stuff that you hope doesn't come out in a public forum the way it did. I think that it was very difficult for both sides of both families in this case to stomach. And they talk about secondary victimization during a trial, and I think from the Steenkamp point of view, that was very much the case in this. And I think Karyn tried to do quite a lot to protect Reeva in a way. But, I know that there's certain hurts, for instance, about their financial situation, that sort of thing that the Steenkamps felt, and I'm sure that from the Oscar Pistorius' family felt as well, things that they were horrified that came out. But, when you're so high up, you've got so far to fall.
I think the big issue for me was that, Oscar Pistorius had premised his entire identity on this fact that, I'm this disabled person, but look at all that I've overcome. I'm resilient, I'm superhuman, I prove what is possible out there. And in the end of the day, his disability would prove you know, as in the total antithesis of what he'd done with his life, to be this factor that the defense attempted to utilize, and in many respects utilize very effectively, to say that no, I'm not this superhuman athlete. I'm this, you know, amputee. I have vulnerability. I have anxiety, and that was the big difference.
And there was so much about them as a couple was about appearances, you know, how they dieted, the kind of food they ate, how strict they were about bedtime, looking right. A lot of it was superficial.
Tonight, Oscar Pistorius sleeps inside a jail cell, and we've been through the process of what happens once you are committed to prison, you know, the process that must unfold. What are the next steps here? We're hearing from the prosecution, from the NPA, how they will play this.
Well, they're saying, you know, I think that they're probably consulting amongst themselves and deciding on the next step forward. We had heard that they would possibly appeal or seek leave to appeal if there was less than 8 years. But really, I don't know how well that's going to go down with the SCA. They've heard this matter before, and I think it has to be an outrageously an extremely dissatisfactory judgment, sentence, in order for it to be heard on appeal.
Karyn, you would have seen the split vote, so to speak, amongst South Africans who have been interested and invested in this case. Some say it was just, it was apt, and others say it was far too lenient, especially when you juxtapose it, and I'll test your opinion on this as we have with other lawyers. You juxtapose it with the Jubjub Marahanye case, 20 years, then 8 years for culpable homicide, and then a rhino poaching case, for example, in which the accused received a 77-year sentence.
Well, I mean, I agree with your previous legal expert that you need to look at every case on its own merits. But for me, one of the cases that really stands in stark contrast to this is Cindy Siwe Mangela, who was given 12 years for the murder of Flaba Habedi. And the big issue for me there was that, you know, that young woman stabbed him once, and I think there, you know, there were real issues around the medical injuries that she sustained where evidence went missing. I don't particularly feel like justice was done in that case. And in her particular instance, she didn't have access to the resources to really fight it in an effective way. But I think, and that I think is a spark for a lot of people. Yeah. But ultimately, you would hope that every human being would have the resources to be able to argue the case in a way where justice is. A
quick one before I let you go. It's been a 3.5-year marathon, essentially, for you girls. You've been standing outside court, hours and hours of reportage. Are you glad that at least this chapter is over and it's significantly come to an end now?
Yes and no. I mean, I've been away from my family, which was good and bad because it was a great case to cover. But I also think it's been full of anguish as well. It's been quite emotionally draining in some ways.
I think there are far more compelling stories to tell in South Africa at this time, in this place, and I hope that everyone, you know, particularly the Steenkamp family, gets in a place where they can find closure if that is possible, because I really don't know that they ever will.